Most people picture the burning bush as a sudden, dramatic miracle. We imagine a burst of fire in the desert, a cinematic display designed to grab a hero's attention right before a grand adventure begins. But the biblical text tells a much different story. God did not appear to a young, confident prince standing in the halls of power. He appeared to an 80-year-old fugitive, a man who had spent 40 years tending someone else's sheep in a forgotten wilderness, a man who firmly believed his life's work was already finished and that his story was already over. To understand what happens in the fire, we first have to understand the silence that came before it. Exodus chapter 3 begins at the far side of the wilderness. Moses is tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law. Notice that small detail. He does not even own the sheep he is watching. 4 decades earlier, Moses was a prince of Egypt. He walked the polished stone floors of the greatest empire on earth. He understood the architecture of royal power. He knew the names of the Egyptian gods, the language of the court, and the heavy weight of authority. And when he was 40 years old, he tried to use that power. He tried to become a deliverer in his own strength, with his own hands. It ended in a hasty murder, a shallow grave in the sand, sudden panic, and a desperate flight into exile. For 40 years, the book of Exodus leaves Moses in the dust of Midian. 40 years of wandering through dry canyons. 40 years of learning the quiet, repetitive rhythm of a shepherd. He traded the golden chariots of Memphis for a wooden staff. The silence of the desert must have felt like the silence of God. While the cries of the Israelites rose up from the brick pits of Goshen, Moses heard nothing but the wind over the rocks. As far as he knows, Egypt is a closed chapter. He has been forgotten by Pharaoh, forgotten by his people, and, he likely assumed, forgotten by God. He is not looking for a burning bush. He is not looking for a divine encounter. He is just looking for pasture. He leads the flock to Horeb, which the text calls the mountain of God. And it is here, in the deeply ordinary routine of an exile, that the landscape suddenly changes. The angel of the Lord appears to him in flames of fire from within a bush. In the ancient Near East, gods were associated with grand temples, towering monuments, and cultivated sacred spaces. They were housed in gold and cedar. But the God of Abraham does not wait for a temple to be built. He intercepts Moses in the dirt. He does not split the sky or shatter the mountain. He appears in what the Hebrew text calls a senna, a common, thorny scrub bush, the kind of low, dry brush that scatters the desert floor. It is the most ordinary, unimpressive object in the wilderness. That sounds small. It is not. It is the first clue to the nature of the God who is speaking. God is choosing the lowest, driest, most overlooked thing in the desert to carry his presence. Just as he is choosing an 80-year-old forgotten shepherd to carry his deliverance, Moses stops. He looks at the flame, and he notices something strange. It is not the fire itself that captures his attention. It is what the fire refuses to do. In the ancient world, fire was a hungry thing. It was a tool, but it was also a master. It required constant feeding. Fire needs fuel to survive. It eats dry wood. It consumes leaves and branches. It takes from its physical environment. And when there is nothing left to take, the fire dies. But the fire Moses sees in Exodus chapter 3 is breaking the laws of nature. The text says Moses looked, and though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. In verse 3, Moses says to himself, "I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up." This is not just a visual trick to get a wandering man to stop walking. It is the first quiet revelation of the name God is about to speak. Before God ever gives a word to Moses, he is demonstrating his nature through the flame. The unconsuming fire is a picture of absolute self-existence. This fire does not need the bush. It is resting on the branches, but it is not feeding on them. It is not drawing its life from the wood. It is completely self-sustaining. Later in Israel's history, this idea will become central to their understanding of God. He is not like the pagan gods of the surrounding empires, who needed agricultural sacrifices to be fed, or temples to be housed, or humans to sustain them. The God of Israel does not need fuel. He simply is. But there is a second layer to this image. The fire is holy, and yet it does not destroy the ordinary, thorny bush it rests upon. In biblical poetry, fire is often an image of overwhelming purity and judgment. If a perfect, holy fire touches a dry, broken thorn bush. The bush should turn to ash in seconds, but it does not. The fire of God's presence comes down and rests on a fragile, ordinary thing without destroying it. This is the story of grace. It is a picture of what God is about to do with the enslaved people of Israel, and it is a picture of what God is doing with Moses himself. God's holiness is drawing near to a broken man, not to consume him, but to call him. Moses steps off the path. He approaches the flame out of ordinary curiosity. He likely thinks he is just investigating a strange physical anomaly in the desert. But as he draws near, the phenomenon speaks. God calls to him from within the bush, "Moses, Moses." And Moses gives the ancient answer of a servant, "Here I am." Then comes the command, "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." To modern ears, this sounds like a rule about cleanliness. But in the ancient Near East, removing your sandals was a profound gesture of submission. Sandals carried the dust of the road. They were what you wore when you were traveling, when you were in charge of your own direction and your own destiny. You took them off when you entered the house of a master. You took them off when you entered a temple. You took them off to acknowledge that you were no longer the master of the space. The dirt beneath Moses' feet was the same dry desert dirt he had walked on for 40 years. The ground itself was not magical. It was holy because the presence of God had temporarily made it a throne room. Moses approaches the fire out of ordinary curiosity. But what speaks out of the flame forces him to hide his face, because he is no longer just a shepherd looking at a burning bush. He is stepping into an intersection of history. And the voice that speaks next will force him to confront a past he thought he had escaped forever. Moses is standing barefoot in the dust. The flame is burning, the bush is not consumed, and the voice speaks again. Listen to how God introduces himself. He does not begin with a cosmic, terrifying title. He does not say, "I am the creator of the stars." He does not say, "I am the terror of the deep." He grounds his identity in a very specific family tree. He says, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." To a modern reader, that sounds like a standard religious introduction. But to an 80-year-old exile who thinks his life is over, those names are an anchor. They are the language of covenant. For 400 years, the Israelites have been building bricks in the mud of Egypt. The silence of heaven must have seemed absolute. Entire generations had lived and died under the whip of Pharaoh, wondering if the ancient promises were dead. By speaking those three names, God is declaring that the silence was not absence. He is pulling a thread of history across 4 centuries. He is saying that the covenant is still alive and the memory of heaven is perfect. The text says Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. This is not just the fear of fire. This is a man realizing that the God of his ancestors has suddenly tracked him down in the middle of nowhere. The God of the ancient promise has not forgotten Egypt, and he has not forgotten Moses. Then God speaks a sequence of words that changes the entire trajectory of the Bible. He says, "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering." Look at the movement of those verbs. Seen, heard, concerned. The gods of Egypt were distant. They were carved in stone, seated on thrones, demanding to be served by human hands. They were entirely indifferent to the suffering of slaves. But the God of Israel leans in. He pays attention to the bottom of the empire. He hears the cries from the brick pits, and he announces his plan. He says, "I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land." For a moment, this must have sounded like incredible news to Moses. God himself is finally going to act. God is going to deliver the people. But then comes the turning point. God says, "So now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." Moses has spent 40 years running from Pharaoh. The last time he was in Egypt, he was fleeing for his life with a bounty on his head. Now, the God of his fathers is telling him to walk right back into the throne room of the most powerful empire on earth, holding nothing but a shepherd's staff. Moses immediately begins to build a wall of excuses. His first response is, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh?" God answers simply, "I will be with you." But Moses is not satisfied. The assurance of presence is not enough for him. He needs something more concrete, before he faces the magicians and the courts of Egypt. So he pushes further. He asks a question that seems almost strange to modern ears. He says, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' Then what shall I tell them?" Moses asks for God's name. To us, that sounds like a simple request for information. But in the ancient world, asking a deity for their name was never just about a label. It was about power. To modern readers, asking for a name is simply asking for a label. It is how we introduce ourselves. It is how we fill out a document. But Moses grew up in the royal courts of Egypt, and in the ancient world, a name was not a label, it was a boundary. In Egypt, the spiritual world was incredibly crowded. The Egyptians worshipped hundreds of deities, and each one had a specific, limited jurisdiction. There was a god of the river, a god of the sun, a god of the harvest, a god of the dead. When you experienced a supernatural event, the first question was always, which one is this? You had to categorize the deity to know how to respond. You had to know where their power started and where it stopped. But there is an even deeper layer to the question Moses asks. In the ancient Near East, and particularly in Egyptian religion, a name was a mechanism of control. If a priest or a magician knew the hidden, secret name of a god, they could use that name in an incantation. They could summon the deity. They could appease the deity. They could compel the deity to act on their behalf. Knowing the secret name meant you had leverage. So when Moses stands before the burning bush, he is speaking the only theological language he knows, the language of Egypt. He is essentially asking the voice in the fire for two things. First, he is asking for a category. He is asking the bush, "Are you a mountain god? Are you a desert god? Are you a fire god? How do I explain you to 1,000,000 slaves who have been drowning in Egyptian theology for 400 years? The Israelites in Goshen have been surrounded by statues of gods that look like falcons and jackals. The memories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob have faded into ancient, dusty stories. When Moses shows up, they will want to know exactly who is sending him, and they will want a name they can measure against their oppressors. Second, Moses is asking for a handle. He is asking for the secret word that will prove he has the power to summon the divine presence. He is about to walk into the throne room of Pharaoh, a man who considers himself a living god. Moses thinks he needs a magical weapon to survive that encounter, and he assumes that weapon is a secret name. Moses expects a noun. He expects a title that will place this god on a map, in a hierarchy, competing with the gods of the empire. Pause for a second and see what has emerged. So far, this has not been a random set of details. The fire that does not consume was a physical picture of a god who needs nothing. The removal of the sandals was a physical picture of submitting to a king who cannot be manipulated. And now, the question Moses asks brings the central tension of the story to its peak. Moses is trying to shrink God down into something manageable. He is trying to fit the creator of the universe into an Egyptian mold. But the God of Abraham will not be categorized. He will not be summoned by a magic spell. He will not be placed in a pantheon next to gods made of wood and stone. God is not about to give Moses a tool to use. He is about to give Moses a revelation to follow. Moses expects a name like the gods of Egypt, a name that can be categorized, localized, or controlled. Instead, the voice from the fire gives an answer that shatters every ancient category, because God does not give him a noun. God gives him a verb. Moses asks for a name, expecting a noun. God answers from the fire with a sentence. In Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, God says to Moses, "I am who I am." In Hebrew, the phrase is Ehyeh asher Ehyeh. This is the central discovery of the burning bush, and it is where the entire theological landscape of the Bible shifts. To understand the weight of this moment, we have to look closely at the language. The word Ehyeh comes from the Hebrew root verb Ehyeh. It means to be, to exist, or to happen. But in ancient Hebrew, this verb is not static. It does not describe something sitting still, like a royal monument carved out of limestone or a quiet idol hidden inside a pagan temple. It is a dynamic, living verb. It implies active, continuous, unfolding existence. Because of the way biblical Hebrew works, Ehyeh asher Ehyeh is remarkably profound, and it can be translated in a few different, overlapping ways. It can mean, "I am who I am." It can mean, "I will be what I will be." It can even carry the sense of, I am the one who is actively causing things to happen. Moses wanted a category. He wanted to know if this was a god of the mountains, a god of the rain, or a god of the harvest. God responds by stepping completely outside the ancient Egyptian system. He is not a piece of the universe. He is the uncreated reality behind everything that exists. Moses wanted a secret, magical handle. He wanted a word he could use to summon, manipulate, or control the divine power, just as the Egyptian priests tried to do. God gives him a name that makes manipulation entirely impossible. You cannot command a God whose very name means absolute, self-sustaining reality. He is not a spiritual tool to be wielded against the Egyptian army. He is the author of life itself. That sounds small. It is not. It completely changes the power dynamic of the Exodus. It means the God of Israel does not need the Egyptian empire to validate him. Pharaoh's authority relies on chariots, slave labor, and fear. God's authority relies simply on the fact that he is. But there is a deeper layer to this name. It is the most sacred revelation in the Hebrew scriptures. But it was not just a philosophical puzzle about existence. It was a promise about presence. If we look back just 2 verses, to Exodus chapter 3, verse 12, when Moses first asks how he can possibly face Pharaoh, God gives him a very simple assurance. God says, I will be with you. In Hebrew, the phrase begins with the exact same word, Ehyeh. When God reveals his name as Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, he is not just giving a wandering shepherd a high-level theology lesson. He is echoing his own promise of presence. He is saying that the uncreated, eternal creator of the universe is the exact same God who is actively choosing to be with Moses in the dust of Egypt. His existence is not distant. His existence is deeply personal. God tells Moses, this is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. Imagine being an enslaved Israelite, crushed under the weight of an empire, wondering if the ancient stories of Abraham were just empty myths. And then an 80-year-old shepherd walks out of the desert and tells you that the God who sent him is not a golden statue and not an animal-headed deity. The one who sent him is existence itself. But the revelation at the burning bush does not stop with the word Ehyeh. In the very next verse, the language shifts slightly. God turns this first-person declaration into a name the people can carry with them forever. And in doing so, he creates the specific, sacred word that will anchor the rest of the biblical text. In Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, God speaks in the first person. He says, I am. But in verse 15, the text makes a crucial pivot. God says to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. In English, we read the word Lord in all capital letters, but underneath that English translation is the most sacred word in the Hebrew Bible. It is spelled with 4 Hebrew consonants, Yod, He, Wah, and He. Scholars call it the Tetragrammaton. Today, it is commonly pronounced as Yahweh. This is where the grammar of the burning bush becomes beautiful. The name Yahweh is built from the exact same Hebrew root as the word Ehyeh. When God speaks of himself, he uses the first person. He says, I am. But when humanity speaks of God, we must use the third person. We say, he is. Yahweh functions as the third-person form of that eternal verb. God says, I am. Israel responds by pointing back to him and declaring, he is. This is not just a grammar lesson. It is the foundation of biblical worship. God did not give Moses a secret, magical password to control the divine realm. He gave Moses a confession of reality. Every time an Israelite spoke the name Yahweh, they were essentially saying, he is the one who actively exists. He is the author of what happens. He is the uncreated, self-sustaining reality behind everything else. The gods of Egypt had to be carved, painted, fed, and carried. They were static. They required human effort to keep them alive. But Yahweh simply is. This name becomes the absolute anchor of the Old Testament. It appears nearly 7,000 times in the Hebrew Scriptures. It is the name spoken over the covenants. It is the name sung in the Psalms. It is the name the prophets use when they call the nation back from the brink of exile. Over time, the name became so sacred, so heavy with the weight of God's holiness, that the Jewish people eventually stopped speaking it aloud out of deep reverence. When they reached this word in the text, they would substitute it with the word Adonai, which means Lord. That tradition of reverence is why most of our English Bibles still use the word Lord in capital letters today. But at the burning bush, God was not hiding his name. He was giving it as a memorial for all generations. He was taking his eternal, uncreated nature and attaching it to a specific, broken group of enslaved people in Egypt. Pause for a second and look at the movement of this encounter. Moses walked up to the mountain as a forgotten exile. He asked for a category to help him survive a confrontation with the empire. Instead, he was given a revelation that made the empire look incredibly small. Pharaoh believed he was a living God. He believed his word dictated reality. He believed he controlled life and death. But Moses is about to walk into the royal court, carrying a name that proves Pharaoh is just a mortal man sitting on a temporary, fading throne. Moses no longer needs a sword. He no longer needs an army. Armed with this name, Moses is finally ready to face the most powerful empire on earth. Because this name is the only weapon that can break the authority of Pharaoh. And the collision of those two kingdoms is exactly what happens next. Moses walks back into Egypt carrying nothing but a wooden staff and a name. He does not have an army. He does not have a treasury. He stands before the most powerful monarch in the ancient world and speaks the word he was given in the desert. He says, "This is what Yahweh, the God of Israel, says, let my people go." Pharaoh's response in Exodus chapter 5, verse 2, is one of the most arrogant and ultimately devastating lines in Scripture. Pharaoh says, "Who is Yahweh, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know Yahweh, and I will not let Israel go." Modern readers often read this as simple stubbornness. But in the ancient world, this was a theological challenge. Pharaoh is looking at Moses and Aaron, two men representing a nation of slaves. In ancient theology, if your people are enslaved, it means your God has been defeated by the gods of the empire. To Pharaoh, the God of Israel is a broken deity belonging to a broken people. Furthermore, Pharaoh himself is considered a god. He is believed to be the living embodiment of Horus, the son of the sun god Ra. He is the one who commands reality in the Nile Valley. He is the one who claims supreme authority. So when Pharaoh says, "Who is Yahweh?" he is not asking for more information. He is mocking the name. He is saying, "I have never heard of this deity, and his authority does not cross the borders of my empire." But the name Yahweh is not bound by geography. What happens next is usually called the 10 plagues. But if you look closely at the text, the plagues are not just random displays of destructive power. They are a systematic dismantling of the Egyptian pantheon. The Nile River, worshipped as the source of life, turns to blood. The sun, worshipped as the supreme deity, is blotted out in absolute darkness. The livestock, associated with fertility gods, fall dead in the fields. God is not just punishing Egypt. He is answering Pharaoh's question. Pharaoh asked, "Who is Yahweh?" Yahweh answers by taking every single thing the Egyptians trust to sustain their existence and shutting it down. Because only the uncreated God has the power to uncreate. The fire in the wilderness was self-sustaining. The empire of Egypt was not. Egypt relied on the sweat of slaves, the flooding of a river, and the worship of false images. When the God who simply is steps into the land of Egypt, the fragile reality of the empire begins to collapse under the weight of his presence. Notice the contrast. God is completely independent. He needs nothing. Pharaoh needs everything. He needs his chariots, his magicians, and his slaves, just to maintain the illusion of control. The story of the Exodus is the story of a mortal king colliding with eternal reality. By the end of the narrative, the entire land of Egypt is devastated. The invincible chariots are buried beneath the waves of the Red Sea. The gods of stone and wood have been proven completely empty. Pharaoh asked who this god was, and by the time the water closed over his army, the answer was terrifyingly clear. Yahweh is the one who exists, and everyone else only exists because he allows it. That could be the end of the story. It is a perfect, self-contained narrative of deliverance. But the echo of the burning bush did not stop in the book of Exodus. The name revealed in the fire was carried through the centuries, and hundreds of years later, Another man would walk the dusty roads of the Middle East and use that exact same name. But this time, he would not be speaking for God. He would be speaking as God. Hundreds of years pass. The fire of the burning bush becomes a memory. The Exodus becomes history. The sacred name is guarded with deep reverence. It is sung in the Psalms. It is spoken in the temple. And then, the biblical narrative moves into the 1st century. A new empire rules the land. Rome instead of Egypt. And a new teacher is walking the dusty roads of Israel, Jesus of Nazareth. For 3 years, people try to categorize him. They call him a rabbi. They call him a prophet. They call him a miracle worker. But in the Gospel of John, Jesus begins to do something that makes the religious leaders absolutely furious. He starts using a very specific phrase. When the Hebrew Old Testament was translated into Greek, the word Ehyeh, the great I am of the burning bush, was translated into 2 Greek words, ego eimi, and Jesus begins attaching those exact words to himself. He says, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd. I am the true vine. To modern ears, those sound like beautiful poetic metaphors. We think Jesus is just giving us comforting illustrations. But to a 1st century Jewish ear, Jesus was doing something far more dangerous. He was echoing the desert. He was taking the sacred, self-sustaining name of the living God and attaching it to his own identity. The tension finally shatters in John chapter 8. Jesus is standing in the temple courts, debating with the religious leaders. The argument turns to the ancient covenant and the patriarch Abraham. The leaders look at Jesus and say, "You are not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham?" In verse 58, Jesus gives an answer that breaks the ordinary rules of time. He says, "Very truly I tell you, before Abraham was born, I am." He does not say, "Before Abraham was born, I was." He uses the eternal present tense, ego eimi, I am. The text says the religious leaders immediately picked up stones to kill him. Why? Because they were not confused. They knew exactly what he was claiming. Jesus was standing in the temple, looking into the faces of the scholars, and declaring that the voice that spoke from the burning thorn bush to an 80-year-old shepherd was his voice, the uncreated God, the one who needs no fuel, the reality that sustains all other realities. He had wrapped himself in human flesh. This is the ultimate fulfillment of the Exodus pattern. God did not just send a deliverer. He became the deliverer. He stepped down into the dirt again, not just to break the power of a human empire, but to break the ancient, suffocating power of sin and death. The fire in the wilderness was never just a random miracle used to get a wandering shepherd's attention. It was the first quiet spark of a much larger promise. The promise that the God who exists entirely outside of time would one day step completely into it, just to be with his people. If this study helped you see the story of Scripture with fresh eyes, subscribe so you do not miss the next discovery.